In this video, we're going to celebrate the Los Angeles Dodgers by talking about their entire team history. Stick with me and let me tell you all about it. What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. This video is a continuation of my team history video series. I think this is number 11. So if you haven't checked out the other 10, be sure to go back after this one and check those out as well. But in this video, we're celebrating the 2024 World Series winners, the Los Angeles Dodgers. But to talk about the Dodgers, we first have to go back to Brooklyn. Brooklyn was a hotbed of baseball going back to the first days of the professional game in the 1860s, and was notably the location for the first baseball game with paid admission in 1858. The roots of the Dodgers go back a long way, all the way to 1883, when a minor league team called the Brooklyn Grays, called so simply because the color of their uniform was gray, was established as part of the Interstate Association of Professional Baseball Clubs. The club was started by real estate tycoon and baseball enthusiast Charles Byrne. Brooklyn would play one season as the Grays, for which they won the championship before moving to the American Association in 1884. The AA had been established only 2 years earlier in 1882 and was the direct competitor to the National League at that time. In 1888, the team had 6 different players that all got married that year. So in 1889, they were known as the Brooklyn Bridegrooms and won the American Association that season. However, they lost the championship to the New York Giants. In 1890, the Bridegrooms decided to switch to the National League, where it would stay and become one of the inaugural 8 teams of the league in the early 1900s. They won the National League in their first season of 1890, but went on to tie in the championship series against Louisville for the American Association. In those early seasons, Brooklyn owed a lot of its success to raiding other New York teams that had disbanded mid-season, which happened a lot back then. The use of the nickname Bridegrooms lost momentum in the early to mid-1890s, and the name Trolley Dodgers was first referenced around 1895. The Dodgers name was a derivative of the Trolley Dodgers that generally referred to the dangers of having to dodge trolleys that started to be run on electrical power in Brooklyn rather than horses in the 1890s, and which caused up to 130 deaths in the first 3 years of operation. But the name wouldn't catch on yet, and the press would start calling the team the Superbas in 1899, in honor of a popular circus act at that time, the Hanlon's Superbas. Throughout the 1890s, more and more shares of the club were purchased by a man named Charles Ebbets, another baseball enthusiast and aspiring politician who had started working for the team in the 1880s in the capacity of treasurer and selling tickets and scorecards. As he saved up money, though, he would use it to buy shares of the team more and more, until he owned 80% by the time he was 38 years old. Charles Byrne would pass away in 1898, and the remaining 20% of the club would be purchased by Harry Vanderhorst, the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, a rival club within the National League at that time. When the Baltimore Orioles were to be contracted by the National League, though, as they moved the number of teams from 12 to 8, Vanderhorst would move many of his best players from Baltimore to the Brooklyn team, and as a result, Brooklyn were the winners of the National League in 1899 and 1900, although there was still no World Series yet to be played. Brooklyn would be one of the inaugural 8 teams of the National League, like I mentioned, when the American League was established in 1903 as a direct competitor. But the on-field quality drastically declined in the early years of the 1900s, as Brooklyn went from being one of the best teams in 1900 to sub-500 records and finishing near or in last place every season between 1903 and 1914. Charles Ebbets would sell 50% of the team in 1912 to the McKeever brothers, construction contractors based in Brooklyn, to fund and help build a new stadium for the team that would be called Ebbets Field. In their new home, the team showed signs of life by 1914, having hired manager Wilbert Robinson away from the New York Giants. Robinson was a former catcher with the Baltimore Orioles in that 1890s team, and right-hand man of John McGraw while coaching for the New York Giants. but a feud between McGraw and Robinson caused him to leave and get scooped up by Brooklyn. Robinson helped to turn things around, and Brooklyn had their first winning season in over a decade in 1915. The Brooklyn Baseball Club had been known by many nicknames since the 1890s, with the Dodgers and the Superbas being the most common. A new nickname, though, was introduced for the 1916 season, the Brooklyn Robins, in honor of their new manager, Wilbert Robinson, who was turning the team around. All three names would be used interchangeably, even within the same newspaper articles in many cases, between the 1910s and the early 1930s. They would make the World Series for the first time in 1916, although they would lose to the Boston Red Sox, and would return again in 1920, although they would lose again to the Cleveland Indians this time. Their play was inconsistent, though, as the team was pretty bad between those 2 years and again returned to poor play starting in 1921. Charles Ebbets was instrumental for several lasting changes on the game from his time with the Dodgers, including lengthening the season from 140 games to 154 games at that time, putting uniform numbers on players' jerseys, establishing separate locker rooms for both the home and visiting teams. Before Ebbets, you see, the visiting team would come dressed in their uniforms directly from the hotel that they were staying at. And Ebbets helped establish the 2-3-2 pattern for home games in the World Series that's still used today. Ebbets would pass away in April of 1925 after an extended illness, and as a result, his 50% share ownership of the club was up for grabs. And to add to that, at Ebbets' funeral, Ed McKeever caught a cold and would die only a week later, suddenly leaving the team without two of its primary owners. But Ebbets' will stipulated that his shares were to be kept intact and sold altogether. But no buyer could be found for such a large sum at the time, and so the shares sat with the team for another 20 years. As a result of the passing of both Ebbets and McKeever, Wilbert Robinson was named team president as well as retaining the duties as field manager. But with his split duties, the on-field performance declined almost immediately, and the Brooklyn teams of the late 1920s and early 1930s were often referred to as the Daffiness Boys as a result of their immaturity and countless errors. Robinson would retire in 1931, leaving the team to continue its downward spiral and without a lasting name, as they no longer wanted the Robins nickname, with their namesake no longer with the team. This was the time period when the Dodgers name became primary for the team, with 1932 being the first year that the Dodgers was printed on the home jerseys, and 1933 the first year that it appeared on both the home and road jerseys. Rather than a clear introduction of a name like most teams, though, the Dodgers were more like a gradual acceptance of that name over time. It was at the same time, though, that another nickname was created for the lovable losers. A sports cartoonist in New York, Willard Mullen, was riding in a cab when the driver asked him, "So, how did dim bums do today?" Mullen decided to sketch a series of cartoons about the Dodgers, and as a result, the team became synonymous with the nickname Dim Bums, a tradition that would last from the 1930s to the end of the Dodgers era in Brooklyn in 1957. The Dodgers remained the doormat of the league throughout the 1930s, but in 1938 they hired Larry MacPhail from the Reds as the team's new general manager. MacPhail would lead a lot of changes in his short time with the Dodgers, including bringing night games to Brooklyn, breaking the agreement to not broadcast home games on the radio, and hiring Red Barber to announce games for the team, and making sure Brooklyn was part of the first televised Major League Baseball game in 1939. He helped bring the Dodgers back into respectability, with the team placing in second place in 1940 and winning the National League pennant again in 1941, although they would lose the World Series to the New York Yankees. MacPhail would resign after the 1942 season in order to enter World War II in the Army, and upon the end of the war, he joined the Yankees front office instead of the Dodgers. With another vacancy at the general manager position, the Dodgers hired MacPhail's good friend and mentor, Branch Rickey, away from the St. Louis Cardinals. Within a few years, Rickey had bought 25% of the Dodgers, along with 3 other owners having equal shares, most notably Walter O'Malley. Branch Rickey would be one of the most influential people in all of baseball history on the game itself, including several innovations during his time with the Dodgers. He was a pioneer of the development of permanent spring training facilities, the use of batting cages, pitching machines, and batting helmets, and the incorporation of sabermetrics into baseball, including the first general manager to recognize that on-base percentage was more important than batting average, and that platoon splits could improve team performance. But the most lasting impact Rickey had on the game was the signing of Jackie Robinson and the breaking of the color barrier, a story that has been told in countless places and won't be retold here in as much detail for the sake of keeping this video under an hour, I'm hoping. The color barrier, though, had been an unwritten rule in baseball since the 1880s and had been reinforced by the reign of Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, a staunch segregationist, as commissioner of baseball since 1920. But with Landis passing away in 1944, the time was right, and Rickey, who had been scouring the Negro League since 1943, signed Jackie Robinson to play with the Dodgers in 1945. For Rickey, the breaking of the color barrier was both a moral obligation as well as a shrewd business idea for the Dodgers. Robinson would spend another year playing in Montreal for the Dodgers' AAA affiliate, but he would join the Dodgers in 1947, and immediately the team would turn from perennial doormat to perennial contender. Branch Rickey would supplement the team's stars Pee Wee Reese, Gil Hodges, Duke Snider, with new stars like Jackie Robinson, Don Newcomb, and Roy Campanella and Carl Farillo. But in 1950, one of the Dodgers owners, John L. Smith, passed away, and Walter O'Malley assumed control of his shares, amounting to 50% of the team. In that same year, Branch Rickey's contract as team president was up, and O'Malley decided to strip him of most of his power under a new contract, and instead try to buy him out of his shares to take a majority ownership of the team. Rickey, seeing no point in staying with the Dodgers without having any authority, decided to sell his shares to O'Malley and joined the Pittsburgh Pirates instead, parting very bitterly with O'Malley and the Dodgers, a move that would come back to haunt the Dodgers a couple years later in 1954 when the Pirates and Branch Rickey swiped Roberto Clemente from the Dodgers minor league system. The Dodgers would reach the World Series behind the team Rickey had constructed in 1947, 1949, 1952, and 1953, but losing to the Yankees each of those years as well, until they were finally able to conquer the Yankees by winning their first championship behind manager Walter Alston in 1955. They would return to the series and lose again to the Yankees in 1956, and that would be the end of celebrating baseball in Brooklyn, as O'Malley was poised to move the Dodgers across the country to Los Angeles, and would do just that after the 1957 season. The move to California wasn't the original idea for O'Malley, though, as he first started by looking for real estate to buy in Brooklyn as a replacement for the aging Ebbets Field. But the local government in New York tried to force O'Malley into a building site in Queens, the future location of Shea Stadium in 1962, actually. But O'Malley wanted the city's help with condemning a piece of land in Brooklyn that would be large enough for a stadium, and O'Malley wanted them to help him buy it at below market value. When it became obvious that the city would not support that idea, he began looking elsewhere for a home. Airline travel had become more and more common since World War II, and when O'Malley started considering new homes for the Dodgers, he couldn't take his eyes off the untapped markets in California. Officials from Los Angeles had attended the 1956 World Series, looking to lure a team to the West Coast, but their sights had been set on the Washington Senators, who would eventually move to Minnesota in 1961. Not aware of O'Malley's issues in New York, though, the owner sent the Los Angeles contingent a message that he was interested in having a conversation. LA would provide the Dodgers with what they were looking for, enough real estate that O'Malley could own and control privately in order to build a new ballpark. The National League at first was not willing to approve the move of the Dodgers to the West Coast, primarily citing concerns about travel logistics and costs. The other team owners told O'Malley that they would not approve the move unless a second team would move west with them. The owner of the New York Giants, Horace Stoneham, was having similar issues with New York City in finding a home to replace the aging Polo Grounds. Although Stoneham had not seriously considered moving the Giants out west, at least further west than his secondary solution of Minnesota, O'Malley managed to convince Stoneham and the city of San Francisco to come to an agreement that would support the moving of the two rival franchises from New York to California to start the 1958 season together. O'Malley would become a villain in Brooklyn, as lifelong fans of Dim Bums were left stunned with their favorite team uprooted and moved 2,500 miles away. By the time the Dodgers moved to LA in the late 1950s, the team had brought up some stellar starting pitchers like Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale to lead the team, and they continued their winning ways with a pitching and defense first mentality that helped them reach and win the World Series in 1959, 63, and 65 over the White Sox, Yankees, and Twins. They would reach the World Series one last time under this team in 1966, although they lost that year to the Baltimore Orioles. Koufax had pitched an incredible stretch over 5 years through the 1966 season, going 111 wins and 34 losses with a 1.95 ERA. But he abruptly retired at the age of only 30 due to chronic arthritis in his throwing arm that often left it swollen and in extreme pain after an outing. Drysdale continued to hang on for another few years, but with the absence of Koufax, the Dodgers declined as well and finished lower in the standings until a new core came up in the early 1970s with Steve Garvey, Reggie Smith, Ron Cey, Mike Marshall, and Don Sutton. They would make the World Series again under this group in 1974, 1977, and 1978, as Alston would retire and make way for Tommy Lasorda to take over the helm. Although they would lose the first to the Oakland A's and both of those last two World Series to the Yankees once again. They would make the World Series again in 1981 behind an incredible season from Fernando Valenzuela and Fernando Mania that year, the only pitcher to ever win Rookie of the Year and the Cy Young Award in the same season. And they finally beat the Yankees this time again to win the championship for the first time since 1965. The Dodgers would remain competitive throughout the 1980s, making the playoffs again in 83 and 85 before going all the way again in 1988, getting revenge on the A's this time behind an incredible first-game walk-off home run from a barely able to walk Kirk Gibson that set the tone for the Dodgers during the series, and the solid pitching of Orel Hershiser as well. After the big win in 1988, the Dodgers returned to the middle of the pack, although they did make the playoffs in 1995 and 96, behind big seasons from guys like Mike Piazza, Raul Mondesi, and Hideo Nomo. But they lost quickly both of those years in the playoffs. An incredible and unusual run of stability ended in the late 1990s when Tommy Lasorda retired in 96, ending a run of only using 2 managers over 43 years, followed by selling the team to Rupert Murdoch's Fox Corporation after being owned by a single family over the 47 years from 1950 to 1998, the kind of stability you just don't see anymore. One of the first moves under the new ownership was to trade away star player Mike Piazza, followed by a short rebuild. But the Dodgers wouldn't be owned for long by the Fox Corporation, as they were sold again in 2004 to Frank McCourt, a real estate investor from Boston. And the Dodgers would return again to consistently good play in the mid-2000s, behind players like Adrian Beltre, Kevin Brown, Eric Gagne, and eventually a young Matt Kemp and Clayton Kershaw, making the playoffs again in 2004, 2006, 2008, and 2009, although they were eliminated quickly again in each of those seasons. The 2008 season saw a phenomenal ending as the Dodgers acquired Manny Ramirez from the Red Sox at the trade deadline, who immediately gave one of the best returns on a trade in the history of baseball, hitting .396 with 17 home runs and a 1.232 OPS in 53 games since joining LA. But in October 2009, in the midst of the Dodgers' playoff run, a story broke that Frank McCourt and his wife Jamie were getting divorced. Jamie, who was the Dodgers CEO at the time, was fired the day after the Dodgers were eliminated from the playoffs, which began a drawn-out legal battle during which the financial flexibility of the team was disrupted severely. After a year and a half, a representative was appointed by Major League Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig to oversee the day-to-day operations of the Dodgers due to financial concerns of the team being able to operate without a divorce settlement in sight. By mid-2011, the Dodgers filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection under McCourt's leadership and eventually reached an agreement with Major League Baseball to put the team up for sale. The Dodgers would be bought in March of 2012 for over $2 billion by Guggenheim Baseball Management LLC, a group of investors headed by Mark Walter and including Magic Johnson and Stan Kasten. After a handful of down seasons in the early 2000s, as a result of the team being handcuffed financially by the McCourt divorce, the team began to spend freely again on free agents and made some big trades to return to dominance, winning the National League West every year from 2013 to 2024, with the exception of 2021, and making but losing the World Series in 2017 and 2018 before winning the World Series in the COVID-shortened 2020 season behind Mookie Betts, Corey Seager, and Clayton Kershaw, and eventually winning again in 2024 behind Mookie, Freddie Freeman, and Shohei Ohtani to beat those hated Yankees. So, looking through all of that history, the Dodgers have been to the playoffs a total of 37 times out of 123 seasons, if we don't count anything before 1901. A feat even more impressive considering they only made the playoffs 2 times before 1941. They have represented the National League in the World Series a total of 22 times, winning 8 of those times, which is tied for the 4th all-time with their arch-rival, the San Francisco Giants. The Dodgers have a very interesting history of rivalries, with one of the first being the New York Yankees, as they have faced each other in the World Series a total of 12 times, with the Yankees taking each of the first 5 in the 1940s and 1950s, before the Dodgers finally broke out against them in 1955 to win it all for the first time. They've faced each other a handful of times in the 70s and early 80s, with the Dodgers winning in 1981 and 2024, of course, but the Yankees have won 8 out of the 12 matchups between the two teams. The Dodgers also had short-lived rivalries with the Cardinals, Phillies, and Reds in the 70s and 80s, but that was just a function of the best teams in the league at that time. Since moving to LA, rivalries have been created with the Padres and Diamondbacks, but again, that's just been a function of those teams all being good at the same time. But nothing compares to the true rivals of the Dodgers, the New York and then San Francisco Giants. The rivalry between the Dodgers and the Giants started when they were neighbors in New York and first faced each other in 1889 for the championship, a precursor to the World Series. When O'Malley moved his Dodgers to LA in 1957, he convinced the Giants to move to San Francisco to sustain that rivalry across the entire country. The Giants were typically the better team in the first half of the 1900s, but after moving to California, the Dodgers became the better team for the second half of the century. Both teams have been quite good in the 2000s, with the Giants winning 3 World Series to the Dodgers 2. The teams are tied with 8 World Series championships apiece after the Dodgers win this year. Now, let's talk about ballparks. The Brooklyn team initially played in Washington Park, a wooden grandstand built in South Brooklyn to support the new team starting in 1883. Washington Park was built in an industrial part of town, though, where the stench often overwhelmed the fans during games. As a result, around 1910, Charles Ebbets started looking around for a new home for the team and settled on an area in Flatbush, nicknamed Pigtown, because it was a local dumping area. Ebbets started buying up small lots of land in the area over the next few years until finally he owned enough to plan a ballpark. And Ebbets Field welcomed the public on opening day in 1913. The stadium was built where 9 different trolley lines converged from across the city, likely helping the Dodgers name eventually win out for popularity in the early 1930s. The Dodgers would play at Ebbets Field until their move to LA before the 1958 season. They played the 1958 to 61 seasons at Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, which was a humongous 90,000 plus football stadium that wasn't that well suited for baseball, as the left field fence was only about 250 feet from home plate, and as a result, a 40-foot fence was installed to reduce the number of home runs hit there. During the Dodgers' time at the LA Coliseum, the Battle of Chavez Ravine was being waged between O'Malley and the city of LA against the primarily poor and Hispanic residents of Chavez Ravine that were being displaced by the city, claiming eminent domain over the lands to build the stadium. Initially, the residents were being offered immediate cash to sell their land, and once a few started selling, the city began offering less and less to the remaining residents until there were few holdouts that eventually lost their land altogether. Dodgers Stadium was finally opened for the 1962 season and has been the home of the Dodgers since that time. Although one last game was played at the LA Memorial Coliseum in 2008 to commemorate the Dodgers' 50th anniversary in the city, which saw the largest crowd in baseball history attend at over 115,000 fans. Now, let's talk about uniforms. The Dodgers' uniforms and logos have remained incredibly consistent throughout their entire history, with the earliest uniforms typically gray with blue accents and using the old Brooklyn B logo in most cases. For a time in the mid-1910s, though, instead of using pinstripes, they used a checkered pattern on their uniforms. The Dodgers script was first used on their home jerseys in 1932 and on both home and away in 1933. For a short time in the mid-1930s, the team first tried using red pinstripes, followed by green lettering on their uniforms, but these were both quickly phased out by 1937, and they had settled on the Dodger blue, white, and gray that's so familiar to the fans today. The logo history went through a bunch of different versions of the Brooklyn B style, but most of them are fairly similar to each other. Of course, the use of Brooklyn across the jersey and the B was replaced with Los Angeles and LA logos with the team's move in 1958. And the standard Dodgers logo was introduced at this time as well. But other than that, the color scheme and logos have remained classic. The Dodgers have played with all blue jerseys at times in their past, but these typically remain less popular than the whites and grays. Now, let's talk about awards. The Dodgers hold the record for most Rookie of the Year award winners at 18 and the most Cy Young Award winners at 12, as well as a long list of 14 MVP winners. The list of MVP starts with Jake Daubert in 1913, Dazzy Vance, a pitcher in 1924, Dolph Camilli in 1941, Jackie Robinson in 1949, Roy Campanella in 1951, 53, and 55, and Don Newcombe in 1956. All while in Brooklyn. Since moving to LA, they've had Maury Wills in 1962, Sandy Koufax in 63, Steve Garvey in 1974, Kirk Gibson in 1988, Clayton Kershaw in 2014, and Cody Bellinger in 2019. The list of Cy Young Awards includes Don Newcombe in 1956, the lone winner while the team was in Brooklyn, and the same year that he won the MVP award. And then in LA, Don Drysdale in 62, Koufax in 63, 65, and 66, followed by Mike Marshall in 1974, Fernando Valenzuela in 1981, Orel Hershiser in 1988, Eric Gagne in 2003, and Clayton Kershaw 3 times in 2011, 2013, and 2014. A total of 56 players or managers in the Hall of Fame represent the Dodgers franchise history, including 37 players that primarily played for Brooklyn and 19 that primarily played or managed for Los Angeles. A total of 9 players are in the Hall of Fame wearing a Brooklyn cap, including Burley Grimes, Willie Keeler, Zach Wheat, Dazzy Vance, Pee Wee Reese, Gil Hodges, Jackie Robinson, Duke Snider, and Roy Campanella. Only 3 players are in the Hall of Fame, though, wearing a Los Angeles Dodgers hat, all of which are old-time pitchers in Don Drysdale, Sandy Koufax, and Don Sutton. The Dodgers have retired a total of 12 jersey numbers in their history, including the only number to be retired across all of Major League Baseball in number 42 in honor of Jackie Robinson's contributions as both a player and a human being. The next most obvious Dodger player that will easily make the Hall of Fame is Albert Pujols, who was first eligible in 2028 and played a half season for the Dodgers near the end of his career. A few Dodger players have also gotten strong consideration on recent ballots and could be voted in before Pujols, like Andrew Jones and Chase Utley, although none of these players will go in wearing a Dodgers hat. When considering current and recently retired players, there are a ton of Dodger players that are almost locks for the Hall of Fame, like Max Scherzer, Zach Greinke, Clayton Kershaw, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Manny Machado, as well as a bunch of players that have a decent chance if they can just keep it up, like Shohei Ohtani, Corey Seager, and Trey Turner. Looking back in time, there are several guys that could get voted in through the Classic Era Committee, like Dick Allen, who played one brief year for the Dodgers, Tommy John and Reggie Smith as well. Steve Garvey gets a lot of support and is eligible again this year, but just wasn't nearly as valuable as those other guys over their careers, although he was the face of the Dodgers for a while in the 1970s, and sometimes that goes a long way in these committees. The Dodgers players that have the best shot from the contemporary committee would be Gary Sheffield and Jeff Kent, who finished his career with the Dodgers and is likely to get quite a lot of support in his first time eligible with the contemporary era committee in 2026. Maybe Kenny Lofton and Kevin Brown as well. We'll have to see. The list of best players in Dodger history has a lot of really great names, but since a lot of those greatest overall players didn't play their entire career with the Dodgers, most of the best players were from the earlier days. I would start with Duke Snider, who played the vast majority of his career with the Dodgers and finished with 407 home runs and a 140 OPS+. Number 2, I would put Jackie Robinson, who only played 10 seasons in Brooklyn due to military service and of course the delay from the color barrier, and would have been an easy case for actually being the best player in Dodger history if you were to give him extra credit for all those missed years. The number 3 best player I would probably say is Pee Wee Reese, who played his entire career for the Dodgers as a league average hitter, but made up for much of that with an excellent glove and base running. The number 4 guy for me, I would put Zach Wheat, an outfielder that was the offensive spark plug for the team during the early years as the Superbas, Robins, and Dodgers. And for the 5th spot, I could pick someone like Willie Davis or Ron Cey, but after only 5 years in LA and the rest of his career likely to be spent there, I'd be shocked if this spot weren't taken by Mookie Betts by the end of his tenure with the team. The list of best pitchers of all time for the Dodgers franchise would have to have Clayton Kershaw, an easy choice as the best pitcher despite an early decline due to injuries after the age of 32. And after him, in second, I would put Sandy Koufax, who was actually a league average pitcher for his first 6 seasons, but then was one of the best pitchers the world has ever seen his last 6 seasons before retiring after his age 30 season. In the 3rd place, I'd put Don Drysdale, who actually had much more career value than Koufax, even though he only pitched through his age 32 season, but who was certainly a step down in terms of highest peak. If he had played longer, I would have ranked him ahead of Koufax, but he didn't. The 4th best pitcher, I'd put Dazzy Vance, a pitcher very similar to Koufax in that he was league average for much of his career, except for an incredible peak between 1924 and 1930, during which he accomplished 3 seasons with an ERA plus above 175, and he pitched until he was 44 years old. Rounding out the top 5, I'd put Don Sutton, who spent the first 16 seasons of his 23-year Hall of Fame career with the Dodgers and was well known as an accumulator to reach 324 wins with a career 108 ERA+. So there you go, the Dodgers' long and storied history in 1 half-hour segment. Congratulations once again to the 2024 Dodgers on winning their 8th franchise World Series. Keep checking back for more of these team histories as I make them. And in the meantime, keep talking baseball, take care of yourself, and we'll see you around.